What's up guys, Phoenix here. This video is going to be another one of my own personal deck profiles, and it's going to be of a deck that I actually really enjoy playing, and I have been playing off and on since its inception in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Back in the Secret Forces special pack where it made its debut alongside Necros and Yosenjus. Now, based off that description, the deck in question is obviously Ritual Beasts. Now, this is one of the decks that I really enjoy playing, and if I ever was going to go to an event and not play the best deck of the format, this would be the first pick I would, play, other than the best deck of the format. This deck has had competitive success in the past, and I foresee it seeing more competitive success in the future just because of how the deck operates. It's a very challenging deck to play, but it is also very it's very user-friendly for beginners to pick it up and start learning with it. It's a very unique deck in that regard. So, honestly, if you feel like challenging yourself as a player, as well as, just wanting a new deck to play, I really recommend picking this deck up. There are a couple of $10 cards you'll need to get, but with those included, the entire core of the deck to get the deck functional will cost you about $50-60 depending on your location and prices of the people around you. But this is a deck that I always like to play whenever I want to challenge myself as a player, as well as just start thinking more in depth, because the plays that this deck has, some of them are really linear, but the deeper you get into the combo spectrum of this deck, the more not linear it becomes, and it becomes very challenging. This deck probably has the highest skill cap in terms of, just how, skill intensive you can be rewarded by having that said skill. In the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! In this current format, this deck probably has the most of that. If you have a lot of knowledge about how this deck functions, you are definitely going to be rewarded for it, in terms of, correctly making technical play decisions and nonsense like that. But anyway, this is a 40-card deck. I'm going to go ahead and get into the deck profile and do some discussion along the way. But there are 16 monsters, Triple Elder, 1 copy of Win, 1 copy of Laura, and 2 copies of Zephyr and Pilica are all the Ritual Beast Tamers that I currently run. Now, the reason I run the 1 Win to 2 Pilica, 1 Laura ratio is because even though these cards do essentially the same thing, they're just additional names, as well as there's another card that interacts with this in the deck that you'll see a little bit later. But getting cards back from the graveyard is always more relevant than getting them back from the banish pile, because the graveyard is where you start losing your resources as games go on. Special summoning a guy from your banish zone with Win is never really that relevant, because you can always just get other guys back off of your fusions, as well as, whatever you were doing in the turn anyway. But once guys are in the graveyard, you usually have to go out of your way to banish them through a Pelio or something like that, whereas these cards can recur them from the graveyard. And also, just them being additional names, obviously, does not hurt. That's 4 Tamer names. For the Spiritual Beast side, there are 9 cards. 3 Kanahawk and 3 Rampangu. These are the best ones. You always want to see these cards at some point really early in the game. Obviously, Elder Kanahawk is your ideal opening play, as well as Elder Rampangu is not that bad either. But there are always there's a lot of other combinations of cards in this deck, and this deck is built very flexibly in terms of getting started in your game state, and you'll see that in just a minute or two. The last 3 Spiritual Beasts are 2 Apelio and 1 Petalfin, just for names, as well as Apelio's boost effect is always relevant. So that was 16 monsters. There are 11 spells. There are Triple Chicken Game, 1 Oracle of Zephyra, and 2 of the Space Nipple, otherwise known as Terraforming. Now, what this is doing is this is essentially replacing E-Telly in the deck, because E-Telly actually kind of sucks in this deck. And that's something that a lot of the more prominent players that were playing this deck found out towards the end of last format, and they just completely cut E-Telly from their decks in general. Is because the E-Telly only makes your bad hands worse, and it doesn't really help your good hands do anything that more significant. Whereas with 3 Chicken Race, 2 Upstart in the Oracle, and 3 Upstart in this deck, with the Chicken Race and Terraformings and the Upstarts, the deck is essentially 32 cards, giving you a higher percentage chance of getting into your Tamers, your Elder Kanahawk plays, your Elder Rampangu plays, things of that nature. But as well as that, Oracle of Zephyra, if you don't know what this card does, it's a field spell, so it's searchable of Terraforming, and when you activate it, you search a Zephyr card from your deck to your hand. So, in this case, Zephyr and Pilica. And It's got bulleted effects that aren't really relevant for you. They do come up when you fusion summon using a Zephyr card. So when you contact out with Zephyr and Pilica, you can special summon another monster from your hand, which sometimes does come up in extending your combos. And then its only other effect that you use in this build is the Exceeds effect, which is if you Exceeds using Pilica, you can draw a card and then discard a card. So you can dig for more traps, but that only ever comes up when you're making Totem Bird, and in which case Totem Bird is like a trap anyway, so it does help you dig for, 2 traps for the price of 1, essentially. But that aside, what this engine is essentially doing is that these cards essentially replace the E-Teles that the deck used to run in the past, and what it does is that it allows you to open various different combinations of cards that aren't Elder Conahawk or Elder Rampengu, and still be able to get going in the game, in the sense of terraforming into this equals Pilica, which gets your dude back from grave. So you can open with either Rampengu or Conahawk plus terraforming, Laura, Pilica, or the Oracle, and you can either have ambushes with that as well, and you'll get out of your early game, and you'll get moving into your combos by your next turn, which is very relevant. So you can spend a turn walling behind whatever traps you had, and this will get you where you need to be. And with the Oracle's edition, it means that you're running 7 Ritual Beast Tamers when you don't need them and you already have them in circulation, but as soon as you need one, like if you need to recur something from grave or whatever, you have 3 additional copies of Pilica, which is essentially, it's a Laura effect. So you have 3 copies of a Laura recur from grave effect when you don't need it, but when you do need it, you have 6 copies. So it basically helps recur your resource, get your resources out of the grave where they're, not doing anything for you. The deck is essentially 32 cards with 3 Chicken Game, 2 Terraforming, and 3 Upstart. It just increases your overall percentages, as well as it replaces E-Teles with cards that actually further game states and, get you into more solid situations. And then the last 2 spells are just One Of's Foolish and Raigeki. Goldsark actually just kind of really sucks in this deck now. Simply because the only interaction Goldsark has to get you started is Goldsark and then having Win in hand, and that doesn't really benefit you that much because you're going to be Goldsarking for Conahawk or something, and then you're going to be wasting your special summon so you're not going to be able to get that far out of the early game in that sense. And Goldsark is just overall a very slow card, whereas this can just be an extra copy of Conahawk or Rampengu to combo with your Terraformings into Oracle, plus, the Pilicas and Lauras that you have. So, this can go with the 6 theoretical copies of cards to get a Conahawk or Rampengu back from grave. And Raigeki is just, a powerful card. Soul Charge, I didn't feel was needed in this deck. I tested it and I ended up cutting it, simply because, this deck has Ambush, and Ambush is easily accessible. And so, it feels like you're really playing from behind when you're trying to Soul Charge, even though it does clear cards out of your graveyard. And get them back into the resource pool. It's just one of those cards that you don't really need it. It eats up a lot of your special summons per turn, and Ambush just overall as a card is a lot better. Playing Soul Charge is a card you only activated whenever you're going to be playing from behind anyway, and you don't really want to build your deck to anticipate playing from behind, in a reasonable sense. But anyway, that was 11 spells. There's 13 traps, 3 copies of Steeds, and 3 copies of Ambush for the Ritual Beast spells and traps. I don't play Bond. I was testing it, but I ended up cutting it just because every time I'd search it, I was just using it as fluff material to go with Ulti Gaia Peleo. But for those of you that don't know what Steeds does, you can only activate it if you control a face-up Ritual Beast monster. Destroy a number of monsters on the field up to the number of Ritual Beast monsters you control. So if you control 3 Ritual Beast monsters when this card resolves, you can destroy up to 3 monsters, and it does not target. You can destroy your own, you can destroy your opponents, you can do whatever. So the fact that it doesn't target, this card's basically just like a better copy of Sanctum into Moral Tech. Ambush, if you don't know what that card does, this is like a Booge incarnation for the deck. You can only activate 1 Ritual Beast Ambush per turn. If you activate a Ritual Beast Ambush during that turn, you can only special summon Ritual Beast monsters. But that's almost never actually a drawback, simply because you almost never exceed with this deck anyway. You almost always go into your fusions. As well as that, you're more than often going to be in-phasing this, or at least playing it on your opponent's turn in some way. But what its effect is that you target one of your banished and or engrave Ritual Beast Tamers and Spiritual Beast monsters and special summon them into the field. So it gets you one of your Tamers and one of your Spiritual Beasts back from either your grave or your banished pile. You get to choose. You can mix and match. You can do anything in that regard. So this card being searchable, it allows you to keep up steam in your deck, and essentially it allows you to, if you structured your first turn play correctly, one of these cards allows you to completely just go off on your next turn, and you almost always either end the game on that turn or like your opponent's not able to play the game from there. It's really insane. 2 copies of Phoenix Chain and 2 copies of Mirror Force are an additional part of the trap lineup. You could play D-Prison instead of Mirror Force, and it's probably better, but in the testing that I've been doing, I found that when people try to play around Steeds, hitting their most important cards, they'll like try to attack over your weenie Ritual Beast monsters that you leave on the field, and by doing that, they with the cards that wouldn't really benefit you to Steeds at that point. At that point, like, they're playing into Mirror Force or D-Prison. Mirror Force just seemed like the better of the two, so that's why I'm playing it. It just seemed better than like Torrential or Bottomless in the current format, as well as like the fact that this deck, the last traps in this deck are Macro, Vanity, and Warning. Just before I explain this, the fact that you can just flip Macro, and in the side there's D-Fissure, so you can have D-Fissure plus Mirror Force or Macro plus Mirror Force against like Burning Abyss, Necros, or Cleaves, or Dolls, and you're just going to blow them out from there, whereas like Macro plus Steeds is already another blowout. And like Macro keeps you from losing resources in your graveyard, so like that's something else in that regard entirely. But Macro is ideally it's the best floodgate for this deck, and it doesn't stop your opponent from playing, but it just makes your game state better than theirs. And like Mirror Force, even without Macro, against decks like Shadal's and like Necros, and even sometimes in certain situations against Burning Abyss, this card is still just really powerful because they are just trying to play around Steeds, or they're trying to they're just trying to hit you with the sauce. Against Cleaves, it just clears their board, but they can pendulum them back anyway, but Steeds already does a good enough job controlling that. You can usually set yourself up to Steeds them for up to 5 every turn that they're trying to pendulum out, so you can essentially control the Cleave matchup in that way. This deck just has a lot of control over a lot of different matchups. This deck I wouldn't say necessarily has a really bad matchup against any deck. It just kind of bricks. And that's kind of the worst thing about this deck. If this deck ever got like a Rhoda card that could search any of these guys, like specifically either Elder or Conahawk, if they got a card like that that could go in the main deck, I would easily see this being like the best deck of the format, because this deck is insane. Elder Conahawk, opening Elder Conahawk is just really powerful, and not a lot of decks can handle it unless they like summon Denko or something. But yeah, anyway, the extra deck, you actually don't really need Xyz monsters. Every Xyz monster you play is really up to personal preference. They're all very utilitarian based. Most of the time, like 99% of your game states, you're always only ever going for the fusions, because those are what are going to further your game state, allow you to do anything, like allow you to negate a lot of things, stuff like that. But anyway, the fusions are 2 copies of Ulti Guy Peleo. He takes one of the smaller fusions, a Tamer and a Spiritual Beast to make. He's the only one that requires that. Everyone else just requires a Tamer and a Spiritual Beast. He's got 3200 attack, so he can get over towers if you boost with regular Tiny Apelio at least once, which is relevant. And his effect is a Solemn Judgment by banishing Ritual Beast cards from your hand. Multiple times per chain, more than once per turn. So the turns that you can make this, you usually like do an Ulti Conahawk search for you can usually get like 4 or 5 Conahawk searches, and then make this, and you have at least like anywhere between 3 to 5 negations in your hand. So you can essentially lock your opponent out of the game with this card. 3 copies of Ulti Apelio. 2600, when he attacks, he's an Armades. He's unaffected by all other cards in the game. So he's good for like hitting through Valve and things like that. The only problem with that is that like if he attacks, he'll lose the boost from Tiny Apelio because he's unaffected by every other card effect. And that is something that is relevant sometimes, but as far as that, like the ability to make 2 of these and hit for like a lot of damage is really it's really something. And then you can usually follow it up with like a Guy Apelio and lock your opponent out of the game from there. 3 copies of Ulti Conahawk. This is arguably the most important one. He's your searcher. You put 2 of your banished Ritual Beast cards back into your graveyard, you return them to grave, and then search a Ritual Beast card. So he's what allows you to search for Steeds, Ambush, and stuff like that. And then all of them, except for Guy Apelio, have the tag out effect to summon 2 of your banished Ritual Beast cards. So all the fusions further your play. 1 copy of Ritual Beast Ulti Petalfin. Now this is just a thing that I do. If you're not familiar with this deck, and is comfortable playing this deck as I am, I would definitely recommend playing 2 of this. I'd definitely recommend cutting one of these Exceeds that you never make to have a 2nd copy of this, but because like if you get rid of this off of Rampangu and then you end up needing it because you didn't expect the game to go that way, and you feel like you need this as a safety net, I would definitely play the second one of this. But I'm comfortable enough with this deck that I can play one, and it's almost never a problem, simply because of like the way that I structure my plays, and when and where I play this card and where I put it has never been an issue for me. So that's just a personal thing. If you're not comfortable enough with the deck to always feel like you will be able to play around with this card correctly, definitely up it to 2 and cut one of the Exceeds monsters. But for the Exceeds that you never really summon, I think like in like the past week that I've been play testing this deck like thoroughly, because I was going to play this at a regional, but I decided to judge the regional instead. This Saturday regional, this coming Saturday in Georgia, I was going to play this deck, but then I decided to judge because they had a spot open and they needed someone competent. But in the testing that I was doing with this deck, like I only ever summoned like out of this extra deck like 3 times, and like one of them was Exciton, and like the other 2 times were Totem Bird, just to abuse Oracle. So I mean, like it's whatever. These cards are all just really based for certain matchups. They're very utilitarian. But the Diamond Tolmaeus combo, Castel, Exciton Knight, Abyss Dweller, and Totem Bird are the Exceeds monsters that are run in here. I don't really want to take the time to get into a side deck because, like, basically the only things you side with this deck are things like Max Seas, Fairy Winds, things like that. You can side Wavering Eyes with this deck as well, which is something I've been doing because you can side Wavering Eyes against Pendulum decks, and then chain it to their Wavering Eyes, and then you'll search your own Pilica, which it's been a blowout every time you catch your opponent in the right situation with it. But anyway, that is all for this deck profile. Like I said, like the Exceeds aren't really necessary. Basically, the only thing you need in the extra deck are the fusions, because all of the fusions alongside cards like Petalfin and Ultia Pelio and Guy Pelio and stuff like that, they deal with threats efficiently enough as is, and you like lose your resources if you go into like rank 4s. But like they're there for the option, and you can definitely use them any way that you want to. But as I said, that is all for this deck profile. As always, guys, comment, rate, subscribe. Like the video if you like the content I've been producing and would like to support myself and the channel's growth now as well as in the future. Click an ad if you have not. I'd greatly appreciate it. It helps me make money, and there's no reason to lie to you guys about that. But I would not be offended nor take it personally if you decided you did not want to. It's something I can't force you to do. Just know that it just helps me out immensely, more than you can ever know if you decide to do so. Like I said, the Georgia Regional that is this Saturday on October 30th, or not October 30th, Jesus, I am a couple months ahead, August 30th, that month. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be on judge staff, though, but if you were there, just say hi. I might not have a lot of time to stick around and chat unless I'm on break or something, just because, like I said, I'm going to be on judge staff. I'm going to physically be working, but I definitely have no problem just, like, saying hi and having, a little chat with you for as much time that I have. But anyway, as always, guys, that is it for this video, and take care.